Hi everyone, I'm Kimberlee and I am not an actuary. I am here with my colleague Chris Dolman to talk about the current challenges that AI brings to insurance and the insurance industry. We'll talk about why we need an interdisciplinary approach to address these challenges, why the insurance industry currently sits poised at something of an inflection point, why insurance is not just another industry that can use data as it wishes, but needs to think carefully about how large-scale data analytics and artificial intelligence are used, and how we as a team are thinking about a path forward. Insurance is an industry that has long sought to improve its predictions regarding the risks we all face. But deeply challenging questions are arising as we seek to apply our increasing capacities in data and AI to draw inferences, make predictions, and importantly, act on those inferences and predictions automatically and at scale. The more we're able to predict potential events in a person's future, a future medical condition, a job loss, an environmental risk to their home, the more we're confronted with hard questions about which risks a person ought to bear themselves, and which ones should be pooled, and which ones should be socialised. Data analytics exposes these problems and others, makes them manifest and quantifiable, and forces us to make explicit choices or trade-offs about what we pool and what we don't. We have to decide what data to include, what factors it is fair or unfair to take into account in setting prices, or applying underwriting and conditions, or making claims decisions. And we need to decide when it's safe to set our machines working in an automated fashion, when human oversight is needed, and how much. Now, these are hard questions demanding different kinds of expertise beyond the purely actuarial to answer them. We think that philosophy can help by revealing the moral costs and benefits of applying AI in particular ways. Sociology is focused on how real people make these trade-offs and choices, or how they think they should be made. Law translates these insights into regulatory frameworks. We have all of these types of expertise on our team and more. We have Chris here from IAG bringing industry expertise. We have Tiberio Caetano with expertise in cutting-edge data and AI, as well as its industry application. And every expertise and every person on this team is needed and interested in insurance because, venerable societal institution as it is, insurance sits, maybe teeters, at something of an inflection point. It's arguable that the insurance industry has achieved certain forms of fairness and societal acceptance by historical accident rather than deliberate design. What you might call the traditional or pre-AI insurance industry, for the most part, categorised people and risk at a pretty high level. It might have meant a lot of cross-subsidies from low-risk consumers to high-risk consumers, but it was simple enough for people to understand that's what insurance did, and it was always also pretty easy to understand why your insurance company asked for certain data, why it wanted to know where you lived and whether you had deadlocks on the doors. But a number of developments in the industry's use of data analytics, artificial intelligence and automation are challenging this historic settlement and are attracting, importantly, the attention of civil society and regulators in recent times. For one thing, it seems that at least parts of society, politicians, civil society and the public generally, do not always accept, or do not always seem to accept, that individuals facing higher risks should pay more for their insurance. Floods and other natural disasters have revealed the social cost of historic decisions to build on floodplains, but how to respond, especially when the people in those houses may already be disadvantaged, whether they should be insurable, has become a real political flashpoint. And one to which different countries are responding differently. Australia's cyclone reinsurance pool is quite different from the UK's flood re, which operates under a different design, or the US's NFIP, which is different again. With some risks that we can identify that people face, we've simply decided not to factor them in or that they shouldn't be factored in. For example, the various moratoria on the use of genetic data in life insurance underwriting. The use of what might be called non-risk considerations in pricing has also attracted significant attention and regulatory attention, particularly when, if done in a very granular manner, it can result in policymakers paying differing amounts for what might appear to be the same level of risk, or for policies with substantially similar risk attributes. To a lot of consumer groups, this just doesn't seem fair, and to many regulators seem to agree. And regulators in the UK, Ireland and the US have all responded to price optimisation and non-risk considerations in pricing, but again, differently. The UK's intervention in 2020 was different from Ireland's intervention, which used different comparators. US state regulators have done everything from banning the use of non-risk factors in price setting altogether, banning certain rating factors, or restricting the use of third-party data. In short, as data is leading to more individual variation in pricing, and the more we pick apart mutualisation and do individualised or personalised pricing, the more questions are getting raised in society about what's fair and what is not. And these questions are definitely being asked. Consumer groups in particular are using a range of methods to test the variation in quote prices or in claims resolution, and are finding some patterns that they don't like. In the US and in the UK investigations, there have been problematic correlations between higher prices and race, with higher quote pricing in the UK in non-white neighbourhoods, or more prolonged claims processes for people of colour in the US. Digital has become a tool, not just for the industry, but for the investigation of the industry. And as far as I can see, speaking as an academic who works in a law school and looks at the reports that are being produced, as far as I can see, the industry response has not been strong or publicly convincing to the broader public. You know, when the UK's industry body Citizens Advice referred to an ethnicity penalty, the insurance industry's body's response was to say, well, we don't use race as a factor in pricing, which is fine as long as you don't understand proxies. And as far as we can tell too, regulators don't know quite what to do because in every country they're responding differently. And we're seeing piecemeal, inconsistent responses. And this suggests there's some room for serious, philosophically and sociologically informed foundation work to work out what people think is fair in insurance, and a broader conversation about how to enact socially responsible insurance in this era. Automation and its impacts are also attracting attention. Automation can reduce costs, speed up decision-making on claims, but it could also lead to wrongful rejection or increased rates of rejection, or rejection of claims that would previously have been accepted. And there have been some recent publications like that of ProPublica looking at investigation of a system that allowed medical insurer Cigna to deny claims without any substantive review by a medical professional. So in summary, or rather, when we look across automation and we look across the use of data, we see a lot of public attention and a lot of concern about what the industry is doing. And this feeds into a broader context as well. If we look beyond insurance, there's been a lot of public discussion going on about data use by a range of industries, and concern that from the public, the data about people is being used in an unfair or extractive or exploitative way and against consumers. And a risk that the insurance industry currently faces is that it will be painted, a narrative will develop that it is just another data-hungry, exploitative industry. And that's a problem for reasons that Chris will now outline.
Okay, thank you, Kim. Okay, so why does this matter then? Why are we embarking on this project? Well, insurance isn't just another industry, right? We've talked about this a lot today. At the conference, there's been virtually every speaker today is focused on why insurance is somewhat different from other sectors. So it is sort of woven through the fabric of our society and through our economy, right? Imagine doing things like owning a house or driving a car or building a skyscraper without insurance to support those activities. It would be pretty tricky. And I, as a homeowner, certainly wouldn't want to be that without my home insurance policy to protect me from the bushfire that might burn it at some point. So we do treat insurance differently already from a lot of other sectors. In Australia, there are various schemes for various products that we deem to be socially important. So CTP, for example, is regulated through various state schemes. We have links between superannuation and things like life insurance. We have private health insurance that is operated through community rating. So there are lots of mechanisms in Australia already where we treat insurance differently. And it is highly regulated. There are obligations that go way beyond traditional consumer protections because insurance is somewhat different and requires different treatment. Just thinking about data use, insurance is somewhat spectacularly different from other sectors. We have special rights to ask for information and demand truthful answers. Almost no sector has similar sorts of rights to ask consumers for information. And we're allowed to make use of data that in other contexts wouldn't be acceptable. So that, for example, we can use age to price insurance, and age discrimination is generally illegal, but insurers have have the ability to use that for pricing decisions still, because we recognize that it is somewhat special. So the broad aims of our project then are to think about what the future might look like as data becomes more available, as machine learning and AI become more available and we can automate more things at more granular levels. What can a future look like that actually enhances or promotes the role of insurance in society, rather than the somewhat dystopic view that might arise from what Kim was saying earlier? So we're going to try and conduct some foundational research to grapple with these questions and then work out how to enact policies and practices in the industry that can promote the role of insurance rather than detract from it. So what are these social functions? Well, the project's going to try and understand these to a greater degree, but some candidate ideas, certainly, early days. It certainly enables us to mutualize risk, and particularly unavoidable risk. Kim mentioned genetics earlier, where we've sort of thought about that as society recently. If you can't avoid risks, then perhaps they ought to be somewhat mutualized. And it allows us as society to also engage in risky activities, so risk-taking, but that we want to happen, because otherwise we wouldn't build skyscrapers, would we? So we can then do things that improve society, but that also expose us to risk. So those are certainly some social functions of insurance that we think ought to be considered as part of this project, and there might be others as well. Thinking about those two then, so if we think about mutualization and perhaps unavoidable risks, perhaps we should avoid leaving people behind, and I know lots of people have talked about that already at this event today. There are challenges though. So what counts as unavoidable? Don't know, maybe there's debate around that. How can data encode these things? How can we understand what's avoidable from the, unavoidable from the data available? Perhaps that's unclear. What are we going to do as a result? Lots of speakers already today have debated that question. So these are hard questions that we need to grapple with just on mutualization. Desirable but risky activities then. Well, we need to make judgments, don't we, about what counts as desirable but risky. Are there some things that are just risky? Like if I drive a sports car, that's risky, but probably not desirable. Maybe I want to, and that's totally fine. No one's going to prevent me from doing it, but I don't think we necessarily need to encourage it. But there are other things that perhaps we want to encourage. So again, what are these things? Can we define them properly? Can we agree on what they are? Can we understand how data encodes them? These are all tricky questions that we're going to try and grapple with over the next 3 years with this project. We think form as well is very important. We've talked a lot about function, so the sort of economics of the insurance transaction. But form is very important as well, because insurance needs to be seen to be using AI responsibly, not just actually doing it. So to what extent is just the existence of automation or AI acceptable in certain interactions? We think there's a role for foundational consumer research on this sort of question, and particularly understanding how those preferences might vary across the population, how revealed preferences might vary from stated preferences, and then thinking about how insurers should react to any differences we observe. Should consumers have options? Should I always have an automated interaction for a certain process, or should I have the ability to deal with a human being? That's something that we perhaps should think about. I think about my elderly relatives, for example, who are definitely not ever going to want to interact with a chatbot. I don't care how good it is. So we need to think about whether consumers ought to have the right of those options, or should they just be generally available in the market. Explanations, big topic in AI. We need to think about whether explanations ought to be available, in what form, at what time, for which sorts of decisions. And then privacy, a topic close to Kim's heart, I know, is something that we're going to have to think about. As more data becomes available in society, there are potentially privacy implications to consider. Generative AI, gosh, lots happened in that in the last 6 months. Hands up in the audience, those who've played with ChatGPT. Anyone? Maybe? Yeah, I thought so. Quite likely, we think, to influence how insurance operates over the next few years. We need to think during this project about how that might change some of the historic narrative about how AI works in the industry, and probably lots of other questions as well, right? So we're at the early days of this project, and we encourage lots of questions to be asked, and hopefully we'll be able to grapple with as many of them as we can. So what's our pathway? We have a STAR team, as Kim mentioned, and also myself, doing some foundational multidisciplinary research. We're going to look at actually the reality of what's happening in the industry today. So how are insurers actually using data and AI today? There's a lot of hype, there's a lot of bluster, but what's actually going on, and how might that change over the near future? Then thinking about what might the consumer attitudes towards some of those uses be? Are there preferences that vary across the population? Going and talking to actual real-life people, quite important. Our sociologists on the team is very excited about this part of the project. We then need to think about the philosophical basis for insurance's special role. When is that special role? What do we need to do as a result of that special role in terms of AI and data and what have you? And from all that foundation then, towards the end of the project, we will be developing tools, both technical, algorithmic tools, as well as policy tools, to help us actually promote this social role of insurance so that we can get the world that we want. We encourage lots and lots of challenging discussions on all of the above and more. As I said, it's early days for this project, and we are keen to collaborate with as many people as would like. So come and have a conversation with us, and thank you very much. Invite any questions you might have. Are you going up here?
So thank you very much for the presentation, very interesting. Unfortunately, I have not received any questions from the audience, so
we could ask ChatGPT.
We could ask ChatGPT, and I really thought about doing so because that would have made my life easier. Nevertheless, you spoke both about the conversation you are going to have, and I think it's very broad and it needs to implement a lot of different perspectives, and I think how your group has been put together really reflects this. So could you perhaps just shed a bit of light on the last point you mentioned, how the timeline is, what steps are coming up, and how you plan to integrate the views from external stakeholders, I would guess.
Shall I start and you chip in? I think maybe shall I give some color about how the project came together, because maybe others in the audience don't necessarily understand how these things get set up. So this is a linkage grant project, which is Commonwealth supported. So IAG's supporting it through some of my time and funds, and the Commonwealth also supports the project. And so we've put together, obviously, a team from multiple disciplines, and we're going to be thinking about the sorts of projects that we're going to be doing over the next sort of 3 years or so for the project over the next few weeks/months. So if there are people in the audience that would like to get involved in that, understand a little bit more about it, maybe be part of some of that, get in touch with myself or Kim or others that are in the project. All the names of the people were on the slides earlier, and we can certainly involve you. There'll probably be surveys and interviews and things like that for research. So again, if you'd like to be involved in that sort of aspect, maybe not actively as a collaborator, but as a contributor through those sorts of things, then get in touch and we will certainly add you to the list of people to include in those sorts of activities.
And we're more than happy also to keep people informed as we go along.
Yeah.
The other interesting thing about this project, and one thing that really attracted me at the start, was that, it actually came led from philosophy, which is not the way that everyone thinks about insurance. But the strength that brings is, there is a philosophical tradition in thinking about, I guess, the idea of what is fair, right? And how does fairness vary according to the situation, according to the discipline that you're coming from. And we think that bringing some of those perspectives to maybe challenge some of the concepts that have developed in the industry around what is fair and what is not could be useful. We think the sociological work where we will do, as we said, surveys. There will be, the plan in the project proposal was for a national survey, but Jenny Davis, who's our sociologist, also has a real background and strength in kind of what they call experimental sociology, where you actually put people in the situation and see what choices they would make, which I think will be an interesting method for, again, sort of teasing out, well, here's a risk that people might face. Is this a risk, is this the sort of risky activity we want to encourage? Is it, or not? Is it, we need to encourage the risky activity of driving at night if you're a shift worker, but not driving at night because you want to drive your sports car at 150 kilometres an hour and are hoping there will be no police around. So there are all sorts of, that's not a very hard question, but there are much harder questions in thinking about, what sorts of risk we think societally are really important, and that maybe, therefore, we need to find ways to cross-subsidise through insurance and mutualisation or some other mechanism.
Yeah, or some other government support mechanism.
Exactly.
There's plenty of other examples around the world of all sorts of ideas about how this thing might be managed. So, yeah.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And also, thanks to you. I do have a couple of questions. At the end, we will have 15 minutes of discussion with all the speakers, so I'm not going to take all of them. But perhaps the first one, I think, fits a bit to what you were saying right at the end. Are you including social and government insurances in the study, not just private insurance?
I don't know. I don't think we've thought an awful lot about that particular question. I think it'll probably be mostly the private market, but to the extent that there's sort of hybrids in Australia of sort of government schemes, we might think a little bit about some of those as well, particularly as examples of how things have been mutualised in the past. But mainly it's going to be looking at the private market, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's more than enough questions in the private market to keep us going for 3 years.
Yeah, I think, well, from a personal point of view, I think the whole fairness point, which you really put a focus on in the beginning, and I guess would be the first step to really tackle, might be differently seen from private versus kind of state official insurance topics.
Well, and that's the point, really, isn't it? It's to try and tease out some of those concepts.
Yeah. Perhaps one last question before we hand over to the others. What are your views on whose responsibility sits with when decisions are made automatically rather than by a person?
There's the million-dollar question.
I'll leave that to the lawyer.
What's really interesting and this is, wearing another hat. So one of my other hats is I'm an investigator with the ADMS, which is an ARC Centre of Excellence on Automated Decision Making in Society. And that question about how we think about accountability for automated decisions is honestly a moving feast right now. It is different countries, again, are thinking about this really differently. So I was just reading yesterday the European Commission's proposal on AI liability and accountability and ways to allocate responsibility between different actors in the AI supply chain. So whether it's developers, deployers, the short answer is I don't think there is a short answer, because I think it is going to depend on the context, and I think it is going to depend on the kind of AI technology even, because we say AI, but the way that we might allocate responsibility in the context of generative AI and foundation models might be quite different from the way that we would allocate it if we're dealing with sort of narrow, machine learning, what we're starting to call traditional machine learning.
I called it boring AI the other day, yeah. So
boring AI, right. Narrow boring AI versus generative AI, the answer will be different. It's a debate we have to have as a society, but we definitely haven't lit on the perfect solution yet.
Very good. Then perhaps one last point I would like to pick up on, and I'll read that out. Chris, congratulations on becoming Australian Actuary of the Year.
Thank you.
That was the easy part. Can you explain?
God, there's a part two? No.
Yeah, there's a part two to it. Sorry for that. Can you explain your title in LAC and how being an actuary has assisted you in getting the role?
Sorry, I didn't hear all that. Oh, my title? Oh, gosh. I think I had 4 words to describe what my role was trying to do, and so that was my attempt at that. So my role is sort of looking at ethics of automation and AI and data use and what have you. And so manager of data and algorithmic ethics kind of made sense as a description of all that, but I'm sure there's better descriptions than that. I don't think there's anyone else with that same sort of title. There was another part to that question, sorry, wasn't there? Maybe not. Let's leave it.
How being an actuary helped you in that?
Well, look, I've been an actuary my whole adult life, basically, after university. So I don't know if I can sort of separate being an actuary from what I'm sort of doing now. I mean, being an actuary certainly gives you deep understanding of how data can influence decisions and processes and how the insurance industry works. And so that certainly has led me to that sort of position now where I'm combining knowledge of models and AI and stuff and my knowledge of the industry to sort of grapple with difficult questions. So certainly that's been, well, it's extremely helpful.
Good, wonderful. So Kimberlee, Chris, thank you very much for the presentation and for answering the questions. Thank you very much. We'll see you back again on stage.